The laughter spread across the bridge of the Vaoran flagship before the strange contact had even finished resolving on the long-range plate, and Submarshal Teln let it spread, because laughter was good for morale, and because, for the moment, the laughter was entirely correct. The plate showed a single object crossing the edge of the hollow reach, one hull against the black, and his crews had spent 11 cycles preparing for an enemy that brought thousands. One ship. After all the warnings the Combine had issued about the species called humans, after the sealed advisories and the trembling tone of the couriers, the dreaded answer to the Combine's ultimatum had arrived at last, and it was one ship. Teln keyed his throat and let his voice carry across the wide curved bridge. Hold the formation, catalog the contact, and someone tell the rear squadrons they may stand down to half-watch. We will not need them today. The bridge crew obeyed, but the laughter did not fully die. It thinned into something worse for the humans, into pity, and pity was the cruelest thing a Vaoran could offer. 40,000 hulls of the Iron Concord hung in the hollow reach to offer it. Their formation was a sphere 2 light seconds wide, layered 9 ships deep, every hull a tested killer of the old wars. Against that sphere, the single human contact looked like a splinter floating toward a mountain. Range? Teln asked. 2 million units and closing slowly, the scan officer said. Her name was Drilla, and she was young, and she had not yet learned to hide what she felt. Submarshal, the contact is not maneuvering for an attack run. It is simply approaching. Steady heading. Steady speed. Steady speed, Teln repeated. He found this delightful. It thinks it is a fleet. Let it think so a little longer. The Iron Concord had crushed 11 species in its long climb to the rim of the galaxy, and it had never once needed 40,000 ships to do it. Teln had ordered the full count assembled for one reason only. The Combine wanted a lesson written across the dark where every minor power could read it. The humans had refused to kneel. They had answered a lawful demand for tribute with 3 flat words, transmitted in the clear, so that the whole arm of the galaxy heard them. The words were, "We are coming." And now the thing that was coming had arrived, and it was one splinter, and Teln intended for the recorders to capture every moment of its destruction, so that the lesson would last 1,000 cycles. He had planned this day the way an artist plans a single perfect stroke. The hollow reach was chosen for its emptiness, a stretch of dark, with no world to hide behind, no debris field to break a firing line, nothing in it at all, except the great sphere of the Concord, and whatever the humans dared to send. The recorders were placed at 9 angles. The fleet's formation had been rehearsed until it could close and open like a single muscle. Teln had even chosen the cycle of the day, so that the light of the nearest star fell across the sphere at the most imposing slant. Everything had been arranged. The only thing he had not arranged was the size of the enemy, and the enemy, it appeared, had arranged that itself, by sending almost nothing. Bring up its profile, he said. Tonnage, weapon ports, drive signature. Read me the joke. Drilla's instruments reached out and touched the human ship, and the first wrongness entered the bridge so quietly that no one understood it yet. Submarshal, the tonnage reads at 400 million tons. A pause. Teln's amusement did not move. Repeat the figure. 400 million tons. The instrument is calibrated. I have run it twice. The largest hull in the Iron Concord, Telnin's own flagship, the Unbreaking Law, massed 60 million tons, and was the heaviest warship the Combine had ever built. The splinter on the plate, the object that looked like nothing, the joke that was supposed to die in the first minute, outweighed his flagship nearly 7 times over. Teln rose from his chair. He did not rise quickly, because a submarshal who moved quickly told his crew he was afraid, and Teln was not afraid yet. He was only beginning to be curious. Magnify the optical, he said. I want to see it with my own eyes. The plate filled with stars, then with a shape that did not match the readout. What the optical showed was a long, dark wedge, narrow at the prow, broadening into a body of stacked armor that caught no light. It was not large. It was the size of a heavy cruiser. The eye and the instrument disagreed by a factor of 7, and in 9 cycles of war, Teln had never once seen them disagree at all. Drilla, he said, very calmly. Why does it look small? She worked her board with hands that had begun to shake. Because most of it is not reflecting. The hull is absorbing nearly all the light that touches it. The optical is only showing me the leading edge. The instrument is reading the whole mass, And the whole mass. She stopped. She started again. The whole mass extends far beyond what the eye can see. The ship is dark on purpose, Submarshal. It wants to look small. Teln stood in the center of his bridge, 40,000 hulls at his command, and felt the first cold finger touch the back of his thinking. A thing that wanted to look small was a thing that knew it was not small. A thing that knew it was not small had a reason to hide it. He had ordered an execution. He was no longer certain he had ordered an execution. Garoon, the old weapons officer, spoke without being asked, which he had earned the right to do in 3 campaigns. Submarshal, in 30 cycles of gunnery, I have learned one rule above the rest. A thing that hides its size is a thing that has learned, somewhere, that being seen at its true size gets it killed. That is a lesson you only learn from enemies who could kill you. I do not like what that tells me about what this ship has survived. Noted, Teln said. He kept his voice level, but he had heard the same thought in his own mind, and hearing it spoken aloud by a man as steady as Corin did not comfort him. Hail it. The communications officer opened the channel. For a long moment there was nothing but the hiss of the dark. Then a voice came through, and it was not loud, and it was not angry, and that was the thing that made Dreela's breath catch. It was patient. This is the warship Long Memory of the Terran Vanguard, the voice said, in clean combine speech, in a tone a teacher might use with a slow student. You sent us a demand. You assembled a fleet to enforce it. We have read your demand and counted your fleet. Stand down, recall your hulls, and you may all go home. You have until our drives finish their cycle. Teln let the silence stretch. Then he laughed, and this time the whole bridge laughed with him, because the alternative to laughing was the cold finger, and no Vaoran would choose the finger over the laugh. One ship, Teln said into the channel, gives terms to 40,000. You have a sense of humor, human. I will remember it when I write the report. The patient voice did not laugh back. We are not telling a joke, it said. We are doing you a kindness. The kindness expires in 4 minutes. The channel closed. Teln turned to Corin. Solution on the contact. I want it gone before the 4 minutes end. We will not be lectured by a splinter. Corin bent over his board. He was quiet for too long. Submarshal, he said at last, I cannot hold a solution. What do you mean you cannot hold a solution? It is moving in a straight line at a crawl. A first-cycle gunner could hit it. That is the problem. Corin's voice had gone flat, the way a voice goes flat when a man is forcing it not to climb. The targeting array locks. Then it slips. The ship is bending the lock. Every time I anchor on the hull reads as a different size, a different distance, a different speed, and the array gives up and starts over. It is not jamming us. Jamming I would recognize. It is letting us look, and the looking is what fails. Teln crossed to the weapons station and watched the array try and fail, the soft tone of a clean lock sounding for half a heartbeat, and then dissolving into the rasp of a lost one, over and over, a machine reaching out toward a thing it could see perfectly well, and being unable to close its hand on it. He had commanded fleets for 9 cycles. He understood, in that moment, that he was watching a tool he had trusted his whole life simply refuse to function, the way a hand refuses to close on a dream. The human ship was 400 million tons. It was the size of a cruiser to the eye, and it could not be targeted by the largest fleet the Combine had ever fielded. 3 impossible things, and they were all the same thing, and the same thing had a name that no one on the bridge wanted to say aloud. Send the order through the whole sphere, Teln said. Manual fire. Saturate the volume the contact occupies. If we cannot lock it, we will fill the space around it with so much fire that geometry kills it for us. The order went out. Across 2 light seconds, 40,000 hulls turned their batteries inward, toward a single point. And the discipline of the Iron Concord was a beautiful and terrible thing. And Teln felt his certainty return for one last warm moment. No ship survived saturation. No ship in the history of war had ever survived 40,000 hulls firing into a single sphere of space. The instrument could lie, the eye could lie, but mass was mass, and there was not enough hull in the galaxy to weather what was coming. On my mark, Corin said. 3, 2. Hold. Dreela's voice cut across the bridge, and it cracked on the single word. Hold. Hold. The heading. Look at the heading. Teln looked. The dark wedge had not turned. It had not raised a shield. It had not increased speed. It had done something far worse for the men around it. It had stopped. Dead in the void, 400 million tons of patient dark, the long memory hung motionless, 2 million units from his sphere, and simply waited, as a thing waits, that has all the time it needs, and knows exactly how the next minute ends. It was not running from the saturation. It was standing still inside it on purpose, because it did not believe the saturation would matter, and a ship that did not believe 40,000 hulls would matter was a ship that knew something the 40,000 hulls did not. Fire, Teln said, because there was nothing else left to say. The saturation went out, a wall of light and force converging on one point from 40,000 directions at once, and for 3 full seconds, the place where the human ship had hung was the brightest thing in the hollow reach. Teln watched the wall close on the contact and told himself 11 different ways that mass was mass, and nothing survived this. Then the light cleared, and the dark wedge was still there, unmarked, unmoved, every panel intact, and it had not even bothered to raise a shield. It had let 40,000 hulls spend their fury into the void, and it had stood there and taken none of it, because none of it had touched it, because the geometry the array could not solve was the same geometry the gunners could not fill. For a moment, no one on the bridge spoke. The recorders kept turning at their 9 angles, capturing the perfect failure of the perfect plan. Drila stared at her board, as if waiting for it to correct itself. Korun's hands had stopped over the dead controls, and Telnan, who had won 11 wars by trusting his instruments and his gunners, and the unbreakable rule that mass beat everything, felt the warm certainty drain out of him, as quietly as water leaving a cracked cup. Damage, he said. Tell me we marked it. Tell me 1 battery and 40,000 left a scratch on the paint. The tally came back, and it was the cleanest tally Teln had ever read, and that was the horror of it. 0. Across the entire fleet, across the entire discharge, the Iron Concord had inflicted nothing. Not light damage, not glancing damage. Nothing at all. The most powerful fleet the Combine had ever assembled had fired everything it had into an enemy it could see with its own eyes, and the enemy had not so much as scuffed its hull. Then, at the end of the 4 minutes, the long-range plate flickered, and the second wrongness entered the bridge, and this one, no one would laugh at ever again. Behind the single ship, where the scan had shown empty void for the whole approach, new contacts began to bloom. Not 1, not 10. The plate counted, and kept counting, and the number it reached before Teln stopped reading it aloud was a number that made 40,000 hulls feel, for the first time in the long, proud history of the Iron Concord, like a splinter floating toward a mountain. Drila looked up from her board, and her young face had gone the gray of ash, and she said the thing that would end Teln's certainty for good. Submarshal, the one ship was never the fleet. The one ship was the door. The plate stopped counting at 1,200 contacts, because Teln ordered it to stop. He did not need the exact number. He needed only to understand the shape of what had happened, and the shape was simple and terrible. The humans had sent one ship forward into clear view, a ship that could not be hit and could not be hidden, and they had let it draw the eye of 40,000 hulls, while a second force slid into the hollow reach behind a fold in space the Combine's instruments had never learned to read. The single ship had been an argument. Now the argument was finished, and the humans had moved on to the proof. Identify the new contacts, Teln said. His voice was steady. He was proud of that, later, when there was almost no one left to be proud in front of. Class, tonnage, intent. Drilla tried. Her instruments reached toward the 1,200, and came back with answers that made no sense, and then made too much sense. They are not warships, Submarshal. Not all of them. The tonnage is wrong for warships. They are too large. Each contact masses between 2 and 900 million tons. Some of them are reading as... She swallowed. Some of them are reading as moons. They are reading as small moons that move. Korun spoke without lifting his head from the dead targeting array. A fleet of moving moons, he said, and one ship in front of them that we cannot scratch, against 40,000 hulls that have never lost. Submarshal, I have been a gunner for 30 cycles. I would like to put on the record that I do not understand what I am looking at. Noted, Teln said again, and the word had become a small handhold he kept reaching for in a place that had no other holds. Comms. Open the fleet channel, all squadrons. The fleet channel opened, and across 40,000 bridges, across 2 light seconds of disciplined dark, the captains of the Iron Concord waited for their sub-marshal to tell them what to do, and Teln discovered that he did not know. He had a sphere 2 light seconds wide. He had 9 layers of the finest hulls the Combine had ever forged. He had every advantage a commander could ask for, except the one that mattered, which was an enemy that could be hurt. So he did the only thing left that a proud fleet could do, which was to make the enemy come to him, and make the coming cost something. "To Huncord," he said. "We will tighten the sphere. Inner layers, pull in 200,000 units. Outer layers, extend the screen. We will make the human force fly into a wall of fire, and if their lead ship cannot be hit, then we will kill the moons behind it until the lead ship is alone, and then we will see how patient a single ship remains when its friends are gone." It was a good plan. It was the plan of a commander who had won 11 wars. The fleet executed it with the flawless coordination that had made the Iron Concord the terror of the Rim, the inner layers folding inward, the outer screen spreading wide, the whole vast sphere reshaping itself in the space of a minute into a tighter, harder, more murderous thing. For those few minutes, Teln allowed himself to believe that discipline and numbers would, as they always had, be enough. He had felt this belief 11 times before, in 11 wars, and 11 times it had been justified. Belief is a habit, and habits do not break the first time they fail. They break the 3rd time, or the 4th, when the failing can no longer be explained away. Then the patient voice returned to his bridge, on a channel no one had opened, and it spoke to him by name. "Sub-Marshal Teln," the long memory said, "2 minutes ago, I offered you the chance to go home. You chose to fire on us instead. I want you to understand that we saw the choice clearly, and we are not angry. We have done this many times. What you are feeling now, the others felt too, the 11 species whose names are not on your map anymore. You are not special, you are only the most recent." Teln did not answer at once. He looked around his bridge at the young scan officer, and the old gunner, and the rows of crew who had laughed with him an hour ago, and he made himself ask the question a coward would not ask. "How?" he said into the unopened channel. "Are you on my command frequency? It is sealed. It is keyed to my crew alone." "Sub-Marshal," the voice said, almost gently, "we have been listening to your sealed channels for 6 years. We heard you assemble this fleet. We heard you name the lesson you meant to teach. We let you finish assembling because it is easier to recall a fleet that is already gathered than to chase one across the dark. Everything you did because we let you, up to and including the moment you fired. That was the only part we did not arrange. That part was yours." The bridge had gone silent. Even Korun had stopped working the dead array. Teln understood, with a clarity that felt almost like relief, that the trap had closed long before the single ship appeared, that the humans had not come to win a battle, but to demonstrate one, and that the only variable they had ever left open was whether the Iron Concord would choose to be an example or a survivor. He had chosen. He had chosen when he laughed. "Why warn me at all?" he asked. "If it is already decided, why offer terms? Why speak to me now?" "Because we are not the thing your couriers told you we are," the voice said. "Your advisories called us savages, killers, a death-world species that destroys what it does not understand. We are letting you watch what happens next, so that one of you can carry the truth home. The truth is this: we offered to let you live first. We offered it twice. Remember that you were offered, and remember that you fired, and tell the Combine that the order of those 2 things is the whole story." The channel closed for the last time. Teln stood very still in the center of his bridge for a long moment after it closed. He had spent his whole life inside a single belief, taught to him as a cadet and confirmed in 11 wars. The belief that the Combine could not be surprised, because the Combine had measured everything, cataloged everything, fought everything, and won. The belief had a name in the Combine's old language, a word that meant something close to settled. The galaxy was settled. The questions were answered, and the human voice had just reached through a sealed channel to tell him, gently, that the galaxy was not settled at all, that there had been a whole and dangerous thing in it for 6 years, that the Combine had never once detected, and that the thing had been listening the entire time, the way a patient adult listens to a child plan a great and impossible deed. "Drila," he said quietly, How long has the fold behind them been there? The one our scan never read. Run the survey logs. I want to know if it appeared today, or if it has always been there, and we simply could not see it. She worked her board, and the answer she found took the last warmth from her voice. It has always been there, Submarshal. It is in every survey of the Hollow Reach going back 400 cycles. We logged it. We logged it as a sensor fault. There is a note in the archive, from a surveyor 200 cycles dead, that says, recurring null region, no return, presumed instrument error, recommend recalibration. We have been writing the door into our own charts for 400 cycles, and labeling it a mistake in our equipment. Teln closed his eyes for the space of one breath. The humans had not needed to hide the door. The Combine had hidden it for them, by refusing to believe in anything its instruments could not explain. A species that trusts its measurements above all else can be blinded by a thing its measurements cannot hold, and the Combine had trusted its measurements above all else for 40,000 cycles, and the humans had simply walked through the place where the trust ran out. He opened his eyes. The human fleet, 1,200 moving moons led by one ship that could not be touched, had crossed half the distance to the wall of fire the Iron Concord had built. There was no more time for understanding. There was only the receiving, and Teln gave the order to receive them, and the receiving began. It did not look the way Teln had spent 9 cycles expecting a battle to look. There was no grand exchange, no trading of blows, no slow grinding of one fleet against another. The human force entered the killing volume of the sphere, and the sphere's fire went out to meet it. Every battery the Concord owned, the largest single discharge of weapons in the recorded history of the Combine, a flower of light, 2 light seconds wide, and the human fleet flew through it, not around it, not under shields that buckled and held. Through it, the same way the lead ship had stood inside the saturation, the same impossible geometry written across 1,200 hulls at once, the fire passing where the ships should have been, and finding nothing there to burn. Report, Teln said. Tell me we hit something. Tell me one battery in 40,000, found one hull in 1,200. The damage tally came back, and it was the same number Teln had read once already, and reading it the second time was worse than reading it the first, because the first time he had been able to tell himself it was the geometry of a single ship and a single shot. Now it was 1,200 ships, and the full fury of the fleet, and the number was still 0. The most powerful fleet the Combine had ever assembled had fired everything it had into an enemy it could see with its own eyes, twice now, and the enemy had not so much as scuffed its paint. And then, for the first time, the human fleet fired back. Teln would spend the rest of his life trying to describe it to people who had not been there, and he would always fail, because the language of his species had been built by a people who had never seen their own invulnerability turned off. The long memory, the single ship, the door, opened along its dark flank, and a line of light reached out from it. One line, thin and white and almost delicate, and it touched the nearest layer of the Iron Concord, and where it touched, ships that had survived 3 campaigns and 11 wars simply stopped being ships. They did not explode. Explosion was a thing Teln understood. They were unmade, peeled apart into their pieces, and the pieces into smaller pieces. 100 hulls along the path of one thin line, and the line did not slow as it passed through them, and it did not dim. Evade, Teln said. All squadrons, full evasion, break the sphere, scatter. They tried. The Iron Concord was the most disciplined fleet in the galaxy, and its captains were brave, and its evasion was flawless, and it did not matter at all, because the thin white lines were not aimed at where the ships were. They were aimed at where the ships would be, with the same effortless certainty that the human geometry brought to everything, and a fleet cannot evade an enemy who already knows the future of its evasion. The lines reached out from the long memory, and from the 1,200 moons behind it, and the careful sphere that had taken 11 cycles to assemble came apart in the time it takes a tired man to draw 3 slow breaths. Drilla kept reporting, because reporting was the only thing left that her training could do for her. Outer screen is gone, Submarshal. 4th Squadron is gone. 6th Squadron is gone. They are not firing on the inner layers yet. They are taking the outside first and moving inward. They are being, her voice broke. They are being neat about it. That was the word that stayed with Teln. Neat. The humans were not raging through his fleet. They were dismantling it, the way a careful worker takes apart a machine he intends to study, layer by layer, from the outside in, with no waste and no fury, and the neatness said more about the gap between the two forces than any number on any plate. A drowning man thrashes. A man who is not in danger does not. The human fleet was not in danger. It had never been in danger. It was simply doing a job, and it was doing the job well, and that was the most frightening thing Teln had ever witnessed. He watched the 13th Squadron go, and the 2nd, and the 9th, and he made himself watch, because a commander who looks away from the cost of his choices has no right to give orders. The captains of those squadrons had laughed with him an hour ago. He knew their names. He had served with some of them in the old wars, had drunk with them after the 11 victories, had stood beside them when the Combine pinned them with the marks of honor for crushing the species whose names were no longer on the map. They were dying now, not because they had failed, but because they had been brave and disciplined, and exactly as good as the Combine had made them, and none of it had ever been the kind of thing that could matter against the kind of thing the humans were. A captain's voice broke onto the fleet channel, ragged, one of the few still able to speak. "Sub-Marshal, give us a target. Give us anything. We will die, all of us, but let us die having hit something. Let one of us put one mark on one of them. That is all I ask. Let it not be 0. And Teln understood that he could not even give them that. He could not give his dying captains the mercy of a single scratch on the enemy, because there was no scratch to be had, because the gap was not a gap of numbers or courage, but a gap of kind, and you cannot ask the brave to cross a gap of kind by being braver. He keyed the channel, and his voice did not shake, and that steadiness was the last gift he had left to give them. "There is no target," he said. "I am sorry. There has never been a target. We were never in a battle. We are in a demonstration, and the demonstration ends faster if we stop feeding it. Hear me, all of you, every hull that can still hear. Cease evasion. Cease fire. We will not give them the satisfaction of a fleet that died running, and we will not give the Combine the lie of a fleet that died fighting an enemy it could touch. We die standing still, weapons cold, with the truth intact, so that the ones who count our wreckage afterward count it honestly. That is the only victory left in the Hollow Reach, and I claim it for the Iron Concord. Stand down, stand still, and be still proud." It was, perhaps, the only true order he gave that day, and to their lasting honor, the captains of the Iron Concord obeyed it. Across the wreck of the Great Sphere, the surviving hulls stopped, and went cold, and waited, and the thin white lines that had been reaching toward them paused, as if the human force found the gesture worth a moment's consideration. Drila tracked the dismantling on her board, even after Teln told her she did not have to, because she had decided, somewhere in the last hour, that someone aboard the flagship should bear precise witness to the end of the Iron Concord, rather than letting it pass in a blur of horror. She read off the squadrons as they went, not for any tactical purpose, for there was none, but the way a keeper reads a roll of the dead, so that each one would be a number and not a smear. The 22nd Squadron, gone in the time it took her to say its name. The 5th, the 11th, the 30th. She had served beside half their captains in the academy. She had a memory, sharp and sudden and useless, of standing in a docking gallery as a cadet and watching these very hulls fitted out, watching the great cranes lower the gun decks into place, believing with the whole of her young heart that nothing the galaxy could build would ever be a match for them. The belief had been true for her entire life until that hour. It had been true for 11 wars. It had been true right up until the moment a thin white line proved it had never really been true at all, only untested, the way a wall is sound until the flood comes. She did not weep at her board. She would weep later, alone, on the 11-day journey home, and she would weep again the first time she tried to describe the neatness of it to someone who had not been there and saw their face refuse to believe her. But at her board she only counted, steadily, in a voice that did not break more than once, because Teln had taught her by his own example that the steadiness of the witness is the last service the living can do for the dead, and she had decided to be that kind of officer, the kind who counts honestly even when the counting is unbearable, and she carried that decision out of the Hollow Reach and kept it for the rest of her life. The patient voice did not return at once. Instead, the long memory, the single ship that the whole fleet had laughed at 1 hour before, moved. For the entire battle it had hung nearly motionless, letting the moons behind it do the work that needed numbers. But now it slid forward through the debris of the Iron Concorde, unhurried, 400 million tons of dark passing close enough to Teln's flagship that the optical at last showed him the truth his instruments had been screaming since the first minute. The ship was vast. The wedge his eye had called a cruiser was only the prow, the smallest visible piece, and behind it, the hull went on, a city of armor and gun and patient engineering, weathered along every surface by scars his species could not have inflicted, the marks of older and worse wars than the Combine had ever fought. It was not new. That was what undid the last of Telnan's pride. He had assumed, when he saw the size, that the humans had built something extraordinary to send against him. But the long memory was old. Its weathering was deep, a patina of survival laid down over what must have been thousands of cycles. Gouges along its flanks healed and scarred and gouged again, whole sections of armor that had clearly been replaced and then earned new wounds of their own. Whatever it had been built to fight, it had fought long before the Combine learned to leave its home star, and the Iron Concorde had never been an enemy to it at all. It had been an errand. "Sub-Marshal," Drila whispered, "it is looking at us." She did not mean it literally. The ship had no eyes, but every Vaoran on that bridge felt the truth of it, as the great dark hull drew level with the flagship and slowed and held there, close, enormous, deciding, and Teln understood that the decision was the same one the voice had named at the start: example, or survivor. The humans had killed most of his fleet, because most of his fleet had fired. The flagship had also fired. By every law of war Teln had ever served, the unbreaking law had earned the thin white line. The line did not come. Instead, the channel opened again, and this time the voice belonged to someone else, a different human, a woman, with a tone that was not patient at all but tired, the tired of a person who has done a hard thing many times and takes no joy from doing it again. "Sub-Marshal Teln, this is Captain Mara Holt of the Long Memory. My ship's intelligence has been speaking to you for the last hour, because it is better than I am at staying calm. I am going to speak to you myself now, because what comes next should come from a person, not from a machine, however good the machine is at sounding kind." "Captain Holt," Teln said, and was distantly surprised that his own voice still worked. "You have destroyed 38,000 of my hulls. You have, I believe, the means to destroy the rest in the time it takes me to finish this sentence. I will not insult you by asking for mercy. I ask only that you tell me what you want, so that the ones still alive understand what their deaths buy." There was a pause on the channel, and when Captain Holt answered, the tiredness in her voice had changed into something Teln had not expected, which was respect. "That," she said, "is the first reasonable thing anyone in your chain of command has said in 6 years. You are right that I can finish this. I am not going to. Listen to me carefully, because I am only going to explain it once, and then I am going to send you home." Telnan listened. So did every surviving bridge in the Iron Concorde. "Your Combine sent us a demand for tribute," Holt said. "Then it sent advisories to 40 species, telling them that humanity is a death world plague, a thing without reason or restraint, a danger that must be put down before it spreads. Your couriers have been spreading that story for 6 years, and the story is working, and the longer it works, the more fleets we will have to meet, and I am tired of meeting fleets. So we changed the plan. We are not going to destroy the Iron Concorde. We are going to spare it. We are going to spare you, Sub-Marshal, and we are going to send you back to the Combine alive, with your damage logs intact, with your 0 damage tally intact, with the recording of your own saturation discharge that did not leave a mark, and you are going to show all of it to the people who called us savages." The cold finger that had touched the back of Telman's thinking an hour ago spread now into his whole body, because he understood, all at once, that this was worse than annihilation, and that the humans knew it was worse, and that they had chosen it on purpose. "You want me to carry the truth," he said. "I want you to carry the math," Holt corrected. "A savage destroys you and leaves no witness, and then your Combine tells whatever story it likes about brave hulls overwhelmed by monsters. We are not going to give them that story. We are going to give them you. A living sub-marshal who brought 40,000 hulls and fired everything he had and could not scratch us, and whom we let go anyway, because killing the rest of you was not worth the few minutes it would take. Your couriers said we destroy what we do not understand. You are going to be the proof that the opposite is true. We understand you completely. We just decided you were not worth the ammunition. The flagship was silent. Corin, the old gunner who had never missed a kill order, put his hand flat on his dead targeting array, as if to feel through it whether any of this was real. Drilla had stopped reporting entirely. And Submarshal Teln, who had assembled the largest fleet in the history of the Combine to teach a lesson, understood at last that he had spent his whole career being the student, and had never once known it. There is one thing I must understand, Teln said, before I carry anything anywhere. You say you are tired of meeting fleets. You say the story is working, and the longer it works, the more fleets you will have to fight. Then why this? Why not simply destroy us, everyone, and let the silence of 40,000 vanished hulls do the warning for you? A fleet that goes out and never comes back is the loudest warning there is. You chose the quieter one. I would know why. The pause this time was longer, and when Holt answered, there was something in her voice that Teln would think about for the rest of his life. A weariness that had a shape, the particular weariness of someone who has tried both ways and learned the cost of each. Because we tried the silence, she said, long before your Combine, with the species before you, and the species before them, we destroyed the fleets, and left no witnesses, and let the silence do the warning. And do you know what a silence does, Submarshal, when there is no one to explain it? It becomes a story the survivors tell however they like. The fleet did not vanish because it met something it could not fight. The fleet vanished because of treachery, or cowardice, or a curse, or because the commander was a fool, or because the humans are demons who eat the dead. Silence is the easiest thing in the galaxy to lie about, so we stopped using it. A witness is harder to lie about than a silence. A living submarshal with intact logs and a steady voice is the one thing your Combine cannot rewrite. That is why you live, not for mercy, for accuracy. Teln bowed his head, though she could not see it. He had asked the question expecting a sentiment, and she had given him a strategy, and the strategy was colder and truer than any sentiment could have been, and somehow that made it easier to bear. He was not being pitied, he was being used, precisely and honestly, for a purpose he could understand. There was a strange dignity in it that mercy would not have allowed. There are conditions, Holt went on. You will not be ambushed on the way out. We will not pursue. But the first hull that turns its weapons hot again, anywhere in this formation, ends this conversation for everyone, and we will go back to the neat work. Do you accept the terms, Submarshal, the same terms my ship offered you twice before you fired? Teln looked at what was left of the Iron Concorde. 2,000 hulls, perhaps, out of 40,000, scattered and cold across the ruin of the Hollow Reach. Every captain waiting on his word. Every one of them, alive only because a human captain had decided their deaths were not efficient. He thought of the lesson he had meant to write across the dark, where every minor power could read it. The lesson would be written. It simply would not say what he had intended. I accept, he said, and I will say one thing in return, Captain Holt, that you may believe or not as you choose. I am not grateful. A man does not thank the storm that spared his roof. But I am changed, and the change will not unmake itself, and you have made an enemy of the Combine into something the Combine does not have a word for, which is a man who has seen the truth and cannot stop seeing it. I do not know yet whether that serves you. I suspect you do not care, but I wanted it said before I go. It serves me, Holt said quietly, more than you know. Go home, Submarshal. And the next time the Combine tells you we are monsters, you will be the man in the room who knows that the monsters offered to let you live, and that you fired, and that they let you live anyway. Carry that. It is heavier than any weapon I have. The channel closed, and the long memory drew back from the flagship, and the 1,200 moving moons behind it pulled away into the fold in space they had come from. And within the hour, the Hollow Reach was empty of humans, as though the whole impossible fleet had never been there at all, leaving only the wreckage, and the witnesses, and a submarshal, with a full set of intact logs that proved everything, and excused nothing. The journey home took 11 days. Teln spent most of it in his quarters, reading and rereading the damage tally, the clean and merciless zero, trying to find in it some angle, some interpretation, some way to present 40,000 hulls and zero damage, and a survival granted by enemy mercy, as anything other than what it was. There was no angle. That was the genius of what Captain Holt had done. She had not left him a story to tell. She had left him only the truth, and the truth told itself. On the second day, he called Corin to his quarters, because Corin was the oldest officer aboard and the one least likely to flinch from a hard conversation. The gunner came, and stood, and Teln told him to sit, and they sat for a while in silence, two old soldiers with nothing left to be proud of, and no wish to pretend otherwise. "You have served the Concord longer than I have," Teln said at last. 30 cycles. "You have seen every war we won. Tell me honestly, Coron, soldier to soldier, with no one listening and nothing to gain. In 30 cycles of gunnery, against 11 species, did you ever once miss a kill order before today?" "Never," Coron said. "Not once. The array always locked. The fire always landed. I have killed more ships than any gunner in the history of the Combine, and I never doubted, not for a single cycle, that the next one would die exactly like the last." He looked at his own hands, the hands that had ended 11 wars. "And then a thing came that I could see with my own eyes, sitting still in the void, asking to be hit. And my array could not close on it. And I understood that everything I knew about my own competence was a thing the universe had been allowing me to believe, and could take back whenever it chose. That is the part I cannot put down, Submarshal. Not that we lost, that we were never as good as we thought. We were only ever as good as our enemies were ordinary." "Yes," Teln said, "that is the exact shape of it." And the two of them sat in the dark of his quarters and did not speak again for a long while, because there was nothing to add, and because some truths are best honored by silence rather than argument. On the 4th day, Drila came to his quarters, and she was no longer the young officer who had laughed with the bridge. She had aged in some way that had nothing to do with cycles. "Submarshal," she said, "the crews are asking what we will report. They are afraid the Combine will call us cowards. They are afraid we will be blamed for surviving." Telns considered this. "We will report exactly what happened," he said. "Every figure, every recording, the 2 offers and the 1 shot. We will hide nothing, because the humans have made certain we cannot hide anything, and because hiding it would mean the next fleet learns nothing, and the next fleet after that. The Iron Concord exists to keep the Combine safe. The truest service we can do it now is to make it understand what it is no longer safe from. And if they execute us for it," Drila said quietly, "for bringing back the truth instead of a victory, then they execute us," Teln said, "and the logs survive, because I have already sent copies ahead by 6 couriers on 6 different courses, and the humans, I think, would be very disappointed in me if I let the Combine bury what they went to such trouble to deliver." He almost smiled. "We are carrying their message now, whether we wish to or not. The least we can do is carry it faithfully. I have spent 11 days deciding what kind of officer I am going to be, for whatever remains of my life, Drila, and I have settled on this one. I am going to be the kind that tells the truth even when the truth ends him. There is nothing else left worth being." She looked at him for a long moment, and then she did something no junior officer had ever done to him in 9 cycles of command. She thanked him, not for sparing her, for he had not, for deciding to be honest, when dishonesty would have been so much warmer and so much safer, and for letting her crews be honest with him. Then she went back to her watch, and Teln returned to his merciless 0, and the ship carried them home toward a council that would not want to hear a single word of what they had to say. There is a thing that happens to a fleet in the moment it discovers it cannot win, and Teln, who had now watched it happen twice, came to understand it better than any commander in the Combine. It is not panic. Panic is loud, and it comes early, and it burns out. What comes instead is quieter and far worse. It is the slow withdrawal of meaning from every action a crew has spent its life mastering. A gunner who can no longer hit anything is not afraid. He is unmade, because the thing that told him who he was has been taken away. A captain who can no longer protect his ship is not panicked. He is hollow, because the whole content of his life has just been declared irrelevant by a single number. Telin had seen the hollowing come over 40,000 bridges in the Hollow Reach, and he saw it come over 140,000 in the disputed Dark, and the second time he understood that the humans were not killing fleets at all. They were emptying them first, and the killing afterward was almost a kindness, the way the breaking of an already dead branch is a kindness. a tidying of something that had already stopped being what it was. He thought, in the long days between the two battles, and again in the long days after the second, about what kind of war this was. It was not a war the Combine knew how to fight, because every war the Combine had ever fought had been a contest, a thing with two sides that each had a chance, however small, of prevailing. This was not a contest. A contest can be lost and learned from and fought again. This was a demonstration, and a demonstration cannot be lost and cannot be learned from in the ordinary way, because there is nothing to learn except the single fact that the demonstration was demonstrating, which is that the gap cannot be crossed. The Combine kept trying to learn the contest lessons, the lessons about weapons and sensors and doctrine, because those were the only lessons it had a shape for, and it kept missing the one lesson on offer, the lesson that had no tactic in it at all, the lesson that said, "You are the wrong kind of thing to win this, and no amount of being a better version of the wrong kind of thing will help you." On the 11th day, the surviving hulls of the Iron Concorde crossed back into Combine space, and the questions began before they had even docked, and Teln answered every one of them the same way, which was completely. He showed them the tonnage that read as 400 million and looked like a cruiser. He showed them the targeting array that locked and slipped and locked and slipped. He showed them the saturation discharge, 40,000 hulls firing as one, and the zero that followed it. He showed them the fold in space that 400 cycles of surveyors had logged as instrument error. He showed them the thin white lines and the neat dismantling from the outside in. And he played them, last of all, the recording of Captain Mara Holt explaining, in her tired and respectful voice, exactly why she had let them live. The Combine's High Council heard all of it in silence, and when it was done, the senior counselor, a being older than Teln's grandsire, asked the only question that mattered. "Sub-Marshal, in your judgment, if we send another fleet, a larger one, can we win?" And Teln, who had spent 11 days learning the answer, gave it to them straight. "No," he said, "we cannot win. Not with a larger fleet, not with a smarter fleet, not with every hull the Combine could build in 1,000 cycles. I did not lose a battle in the Hollow Reach, Counselor. I learned that there was never a battle to lose. We are not weaker than they are. We are a different kind of thing than they are, the way a sound is a different kind of thing than a stone. You cannot throw enough stones to defeat a sound. I would advise the Combine to recall its couriers, withdraw its advisories, and never again use the word tribute in a sentence that contains the word human." The council did not take his advice. It is worth understanding why, because the why is the heart of what happened next, and Teln himself only understood it later. The Combine had ruled the rim of the galaxy for 40,000 cycles, and it had ruled by a single principle, which was that any problem could be solved with sufficient force. The principle had never once failed. 11 species had tested it, and 11 species were gone. To accept Teln's report was to accept that the principle had failed, and the council could not accept that, not because the counselors were stupid, but because the entire structure of the Combine rested on the principle being true. A government built on the certainty that force always wins cannot survive the discovery that sometimes it does not. So the council did what such governments always do. It decided that Sub-Marshal Teln had failed, that a braver and abler commander would have succeeded, and that the solution to one defeated fleet was a larger fleet under better command. They built it over 4 cycles. They called it the Grand Concorde, and it dwarfed the Iron Concorde, the way the Iron Concorde had once imagined it dwarfed the Long Memory. 140,000 hulls. Every shipyard in Combine space turning out warships day and night. 3 full cycles of unbroken construction. The great orbital yards burning so bright with the work that the homeworlds had no true darkness for 3 years. New weapons designed specifically against the human geometry. Weapons that did not aim at where a ship was, but fired in patterns meant to fill everywhere a ship could be. New sensors built on the lessons of Teln's logs, sensors that could finally read the fold in space, so that this time, the door would not surprise them. A doctrine written by the Council's finest minds, refined in 10,000 simulations, every single one of which the Grand Concorde won, decisively, against a simulated human force built from every scrap of data Teln had carried home. That was the Council's deepest comfort, and its deepest error. The 10,000 winning simulations. They had fed the simulation everything they knew about the humans, and the simulation had told them, 10,000 times, that the Grand Concord would prevail. But a simulation can only fight the enemy you understand, and the whole lesson of the Hollow Reach was that the humans were a thing the Combine did not understand. A different kind of thing entirely. The Council had built a machine to defeat the human force they could imagine, and then mistaken the machine's victories over their own imagination for a promise about the real thing. Teln tried to tell them this. He told them that a simulation built from his logs could never produce the moment his array refused to lock, because that moment had not been a fact about the human ship that could be measured and entered into a model. It had been the absence of a fact, the failure of measurement itself, and you cannot simulate the failure of the very tool you are using to build the simulation. They thanked him for his input and did not change a single line of the doctrine. Teln spent the 4 cycles of construction in a kind of internal exile that the Council dressed as honor. He was given a tower office overlooking the greatest of the orbital yards, a window the size of a wall, and through it he watched the Grand Concord grow, hull by hull, day by day, until the count of finished warships passed the entire size of the Iron Concord and kept climbing. He was consulted constantly and ignored completely, which he came to understand were not contradictions, but the same act. The Council wanted his knowledge of the enemy and refused his conclusions about the enemy, and so it harvested his logs for every measurable fact and discarded the one unmeasurable truth those facts pointed at. Engineers came to his office with diagrams of the new weapons and asked him whether this pattern or that pattern would have filled the wares the human ship slipped between, and he told them, every time, the same thing, which was that there were no wares to fill, that the question itself was the error, and they wrote down his words and built the weapons anyway, because a question that has no answer is unbearable to an engineer, and they would rather build against a wrong question than admit there was no right one. Once, near the end of the construction, the senior counselor came to his tower alone, without aides, which counselors did not do, and stood at the great window beside him and watched the new fleet take shape in the firelight of the yards. For a long while, neither of them spoke. Then the counselor said, not as an order and not as a challenge, but almost as a confession, that he had read Teln's logs 11 times, and that he believed them, every figure, and that he was going to send the Grand Concord anyway. Teln asked why, if he believed. And the old counselor said that a government is not a mind, that it cannot simply decide to believe a thing that would dissolve it, that the Combine had been built across 40,000 cycles on a single stone, and could no more pull that stone out than a man could pull out his own spine and keep walking. We will send the fleet, the counselor said, and it will fail, and you are right that it will fail, and we will send it because we are the kind of thing that cannot do otherwise, the same way the humans are the kind of thing we cannot beat. He looked at Teln then, and there was something almost like grief in his ancient face. We are both trapped in what we are, the counselor said. The difference is that what they are wins, and what we are loses, and neither of us chose it. Then he left, and the fleet was finished a cycle later, and Teln understood that he had been given the truest answer he would ever receive, and that it changed nothing at all, which was the whole tragedy of the Combine, in a single quiet conversation at a window. They gave command to a marshal named Vesh, who was everything the council believed Teln had not been, aggressive where Teln had been cautious, certain where Teln had grown doubtful, contemptuous of the human threat in exactly the way the council found reassuring. And they gave Teln, as a final humiliation dressed as an honor, a place on Vesh's flagship as an advisor, so that the man who had failed could watch the man who would succeed. Teln went. He went because the logs had taught him something the council had refused to learn, and he wanted to be there when the council learned it too, even at the cost of his own life. He went because somewhere in the human fleet was a tired captain named Mara Holt, who had told him to carry the math, and he had carried it faithfully, and the council had thrown it away, and the only honest thing left to do was to witness the result. And he went, because Drila and Korun were not permitted to come, and he wanted at least one officer aboard the Grand Concord who already knew how this ended, so that when it ended, there would be one steady voice to do for Vesh's crew what no one had been able to do for his own, which was to tell them, calmly and in time, to stop firing. The Grand Concord crossed into the disputed dark with 140,000 hulls in a formation so vast that its leading edge entered the target system a full hour before its trailing edge. Marshal Vesh stood on his bridge, and surveyed the greatest fleet the galaxy had ever assembled, and turned to Teln, with the easy contempt of a man who has never been wrong. "You told the council we could not win," Vesh said. "Look at it, Teln. 140,000 hulls, new weapons built for nothing in the universe but killing this one ship, sensors that can finally see their little door. Tell me again that a sound defeats this many stones." "I told the council, we are not the same kind of thing as the humans," Teln said quietly. "I stand by it. Marshal, I will give you one piece of advice, and you may ignore it, as the council ignored all the rest. When the human ship appears, and it will appear, do not fire first. Whatever else happens, do not fire first. The humans do not strike at a fleet that has not struck at them. I watched 2,000 of my hulls live because I stopped firing. Everything turns on that one choice. It is the only choice the humans leave open to us, and it is the only one that matters." Vesh laughed, and it was the same laugh Teln had laughed in the Hollow Reach 4 cycles ago, and Teln felt no satisfaction in recognizing it, only a deep and weary grief, because he knew exactly what the laugh cost, and he knew that Vesh was about to pay it. The human ship appeared. It came the same way it had come before, a single dark wedge crossing the edge of the system, one hull against the black, looking for all the galaxy like a splinter floating toward a mountain. The Grand Concorde's new sensors, built on Teln's logs, read its tonnage instantly. 400 million tons. And behind it, this time, the sensors showed the fold in space the Iron Concorde had never learned to read, because Teln's logs had taught the Combine to look for it, and through the fold, the moving moons were already beginning to bloom. "There," Vesh said, with the satisfaction of a hunter who has spotted his prey exactly where he expected it. "It thinks it can repeat the trick. It does not know we have learned. We can see the door now. We can see the moons coming through it. Comms, hail it. I want it to hear the voice of the fleet that is about to end it." The channel opened, and the patient voice of the long memory answered, and it knew Vesh's name, and it knew Teln was aboard, and it said something that turned the blood of every officer on the bridge to cold water. "Marshal Vesh," the ship said. "Sub-Marshal Teln, we see you have brought a larger fleet, and we see that Sub-Marshal Teln gave you good advice that you did not take. We have 140,000 of your hulls in our reach. 4 cycles ago we let 40,000 go home to carry the truth, and the Combine threw the truth away and built this. We understand now that the Combine cannot learn from mercy, so we are going to teach it a different way. We are going to make the same offer we always make. Stand down, recall your hulls, go home. You have 4 minutes. But this time, Marshal, understand that if you fire, we will not let you carry a message. This time the message will be the silence where the Grand Concorde used to be." Vesh did not hesitate for even a breath. "One ship," he said, "still gives terms. Comms, close the channel. All squadrons, the new doctrine. Fill everywhere it can be. Fire." "Marshal," Teln said. "No." But the order had already gone, and 140,000 hulls opened fire on a single ship, with weapons designed for the express purpose of killing it. A discharge so vast that the system's star dimmed against the light of it. The greatest single act of violence in the history of the Combine. Every lesson of Teln's logs poured into one perfect killing pattern. And the human ship stood inside it, exactly as it had 4 cycles before, and took none of it. Because the new weapons had been built to fill everywhere a ship could be, and the human geometry did not put the ship in any of the wares. It was not faster than the pattern. It was not better shielded than the pattern. It was simply somewhere the pattern could not reach. A different kind of thing. A sound the stones could not strike. And the Council's 4 cycles of work, and 10,000 winning simulations and finest doctrine amounted, when the light cleared, to exactly the same number Teln had carried home from the Hollow Reach. 0. "Report," Vesh said, and his voice had changed, and Teln knew the change, and pitied it. "0 damage, Marshal," the sensor officer said. "We hit nothing. We have hit nothing at all." Teln watched Marshal Vesh receive the number, and he watched it do to Vesh what it had done to him 4 cycles before, the slow, terrible work of a certainty coming apart. Vesh had spent 4 cycles being told by the Council that Teln had failed through weakness, that a bolder commander with better weapons and a larger fleet would simply not have lost. And he had believed it, because believing it was easier than believing the alternative, and now the alternative was sitting on his sensor board in a single digit, and there was no escaping it. He had brought 140,000 hulls. He had brought weapons designed for this exact enemy. He had brought every lesson the Combine had learned, and the number was the same number, the same merciless 0, because the number had never been about the size of the fleet or the cleverness of the weapons. The number had always been about the gap between two kinds of things, and the gap did not close because you threw more stones at it. "Fire again," Vesh said, his voice climbing. "Reload. Recalculate. Fire again. There has to be a pattern it cannot dodge. There has to be a where. It has to be in." "Marshal," Teln said quietly, "there is not. I sat where you are sitting. I gave that exact order. The array cannot lock and the saturation cannot fill, because the ship is not in the wheres. And it is not in the wheres because it is a different kind of thing than the things our weapons were built to strike. You cannot fire again into an answer that is already 0, and expect a different answer. I am sorry, Marshal. I tried to tell you. The Council would not let me tell you in a way you could hear." And the second discharge went out, because Vesh ordered it, and it was the same 0. And the third went out, and it was the same 0. And somewhere in the middle of the fourth, the human ship stopped letting the Grand Concorde waste its fury, because it had decided, at last, that the demonstration had been demonstrated. And then the thin white lines began to reach out from the single ship and from the moving moons behind it. And this time, they were not neat, and they did not start at the outside and work patiently inward, and there was no tired captain on the channel explaining why the fleet would be spared. There was only the silence the long memory had promised, spreading across the Grand Concorde from edge to edge. 140,000 hulls, the greatest fleet the galaxy had ever assembled, going out like a held breath. Marshal Vesh stood at the center of the dying fleet and screamed orders that no longer had anyone to obey them. Evade, scatter, concentrate fire, retreat. Every order was correct by the doctrine, and every order was meaningless against the geometry. And Teln watched the Marshal cycle through the entire vocabulary of command, and arrive, as Teln himself had arrived 4 cycles before, at the place where there are no more words. The difference was that Teln had arrived there in time to stop firing. Vesh had not. Vesh had fired first, against the only advice that could have saved him, and the long memory had said what it would do if he fired, and it was doing it. "Teln," Vesh said, and the contempt was entirely gone from his voice now, and what was left was the small, frightened thing that contempt had always been hiding. "Teln, you survived it. You stood on a bridge while this happened, and you survived. Tell me what you did. Tell me how you lived." "I stopped firing," Teln said, "and I asked them what they wanted, and they wanted a witness, so they let me be one. But that offer was for the First Fleet, Marshal. You heard the captain. There is no witness this time. You spent the mercy 4 cycles ago, and the Council burned the change." He put a hand on Vesh's shoulder, an old soldier's hand, with no contempt in it and no triumph. Only the weary kinship of one man who has stood in this exact place, reaching toward another. But there may be one thing left. There is always one thing left, until there is not. Give the order I gave. Cease fire. Cease evasion. All hulls cold. It will not undo what you have done, but it is the only true thing a fleet can do at this hour, and the humans, whatever else they are, have always paused for it. Do it, Marshal. Do the one right thing that is still in your hands to do. Vesh did the only thing left to a man in his position, who still had the courage to do anything. He keyed the fleet channel and gave the order Teln had given in the hollow reach, the one true order. Grand Concorde, cease fire, cease evasion, all hulls cold, weapons dark. His voice shook, but it held. We are not dying running. The hulls that were still hulls obeyed. Across the wreck of the greatest fleet in history, perhaps 8,000 survivors went cold and waited, and the thin white lines that had been spreading from edge to edge paused, the way they had paused once before in another part of the dark, as if even now the human fleet was willing to consider a gesture. The channel opened. Captain Mara Holt's tired voice came through, and Teln closed his eyes at the sound of it, because he had not been certain he would ever hear it again, and there was a comfort in it that he could not have explained to anyone who had not stood where he was standing. "Marshal Vesh," she said, "you fired first. I told you what that meant. I am a person who keeps her word, and the word I gave was that This time, there would be no message. So understand that what I am about to do is not me breaking my word. It is me discovering that I am too tired to keep it. A pause. Submarshal Teln, are you alive over there? Speak if you are. I am alive, Captain Holt, Teln said. Of course you are, she said, and there was something almost like warmth in it. You stopped firing again. You will always stop firing. That is why you keep living through things that kill everyone around you. Submarshal, I have a question for you, and the answer decides what happens to the 8,000 hulls that just went cold. Did you tell the Council the truth? All of it. The way we sent you to? I told them everything, Teln said. Every figure, every recording, your voice explaining why you let us go. I hid nothing. I sent copies by 6 couriers, so it could not be buried. They heard all of it, Captain, and they understood none of it, because they could not afford to. The lie that force always wins is the floor their whole house stands on. They could not pull it up without falling through. We know, Holt said. We have been listening. The way we always listen. We know you told the truth, Submarshal. We know the Council heard it and built this fleet anyway. So here is what I have decided, and you may carry this too. The Combine cannot be taught by the death of its fleets, because it will always tell itself the next fleet will be different. And the Combine cannot be taught by mercy, because it reads mercy as weakness and builds against it. There is only one thing left that might teach it, and it is the cruelest thing I have ever done, and I am going to do it anyway, because the alternative is meeting fleets like this until one of us runs out of patience, and it will not be us. Teln waited. The whole bridge waited. Marshal Vesh, who had laughed an hour ago, waited like a child. I am going to spare these 8,000, Holt said, the ones who went cold when their marshal finally gave the order you taught him, and I am going to destroy the rest, the ones already dead, and let the Combine count them. 132,000 hulls, Submarshal, against our 0, and then I am going to send the 8,000 home, with you among them, and with Marshal Vesh among them, alive. The Marshal the Council chose to replace you, so that the Council has to look at the both of you standing side by side. The cautious one who survived twice, and the bold one who lost everything, both alive, both telling the same truth. Maybe 2 witnesses will do what one could not, and if they build a 3rd fleet after that, Submarshal. Her voice did not rise. It did not need to. Then I will stop sparing anyone, and the Combine will learn the last way there is to learn, which is by no longer existing to need the lesson. I would rather not. I am asking you, the only one of them who listens, to make sure I do not have to. The channel held open, and Teln understood that he was being asked, again, to carry something heavier than any weapon, and that he would carry it, because there was no one else who would, and because a tired human captain 1,000,000 units away had decided that he was worth asking. I will carry it, Captain Holt, he said, though I do not know if they will hear it even now. They might not, she agreed. But you will have said it. That is the part you can control, the rest is theirs. A pause, and then, quieter. You are a good officer, Submarshal. You serve a thing that does not deserve you. I am sorry for that. Go home. The channel closed for the last time. And then the long memory and the moving moons finished what the new doctrine had begun, and the dead hulls of the Grand Concorde, the 132,000 that had fired first and died for it, were unmade against the dark, neatly and without fury, while the 8,000 cold survivors hung silent and untouched in the middle of it, and the human fleet did not so much as turn a battery toward them. When it was done, the fold in space opened, and the long memory slid into it, and the moving moons followed, and within the hour, the disputed dark was empty of humans, as though the greatest battle in the history of the galaxy had been, for one side, a chore briefly attended to and then forgotten. The journey home took 9 days. Marshal Vesh did not speak for the first 3 of them. On the 4th he came to Teln, and he was not a marshal anymore, in any way that mattered, only a man who had laughed once, and outlived the laugh. And he asked the question that everyone who survives this kind of thing eventually asks. Why us? Vesh said. Why did they let us live, when they killed everyone else? What is it about you and me? It is not about us, Teln said. It was never about us. We stopped firing. That is all it has ever been. They do not kill what stops fighting. They kill what keeps fighting, after it has been shown it cannot win, because that is the thing they cannot allow to spread. Not our weapons. Our refusal to learn. The humans are not punishing strength, Marshall. They are punishing the lie that strength is everything, and the Combine is the largest believer in that lie that has ever existed, and they have decided to disagree with it in the only language the Combine still understands, which is fleets that do not come home. Vesh was quiet for a long time. When I gave the order to fire, he said at last, I was not even angry. That is what I cannot get past. I was not afraid. I was not enraged. I felt nothing at all except certainty. The certainty the council gave me. They handed me 140,000 hulls and 10,000 winning simulations and told me I could not lose, and I believed them so completely that giving the order felt like nothing, like signing a routine form, and the form killed 132,000 of my own people. His voice broke, just once, and then steadied. How do I carry that, Teln? You carried 40,000. Tell me how you carry it. You do not carry it, Teln said. You let it carry you. You let it walk you into the council chamber and put the true words in your mouth and keep them there, even when the council reaches for your throat. The dead do not need your grief, Marshall. The grief is for you, and it is a luxury, and you have not earned a luxury yet. What the dead need is for their deaths to mean that the 13th Fleet is never built. That is the only thing that turns 132,000 wasted hulls into anything but waste. So you will carry the message, and you will carry it next to me, and between us, we will be the two witnesses Captain Holt arranged, and we will not let the council look away. That is how you carry it, by making it count. Vesh nodded slowly, and something in him settled, the way a thing settles when it finds, at last, a load it can bear, because the load has a purpose. And if the council builds a third fleet, he said, then there will be no fourth witness, Teln said. She was clear. She was the clearest enemy I have ever faced. Marshall, I have stood on 2 bridges now while 2 fleets died around me, and I have heard that captain's voice 3 times, and I will tell you the thing I have learned that the council will never understand. The humans are not our enemy. An enemy wants to defeat you. The humans do not want anything from us at all. They simply will not be ruled, and they have grown tired of explaining it. And a thing that has grown tired of explaining, and still chooses to explain one more time, is the most dangerous and most merciful thing in the galaxy. And we have met it, and we are still alive, and that is more than the lesson deserves. The 8,000 survivors of the Grand Concord crossed back into Combine space on the 9th day, and this time the High Council did not ask whether a larger fleet could win, because the answer was hanging in orbit above them, 8,000 hulls out of 140,000, and standing in the council chamber, side by side as Captain Holt had arranged it, the cautious sub-marshal who had survived twice, and the bold marshal who had lost everything, both alive, both telling the same truth. The chamber, when they entered it, was not the chamber Teln remembered from 4 cycles before. The counselors were the same beings, older by 4 cycles, but something had changed in the air of the place. A tightness, a fear that had not been there when the council still believed in the principle. They had spent 4 cycles and the wealth of the whole Combine and 140,000 hulls on the certainty that Teln had been wrong, and now Teln was standing in front of them again, alive again, with the same merciless 0 in his hands, and 132,000 dead behind him, and the counselors looked at him the way a man looks at a debt he cannot pay. Teln gave his report one final time. He gave the tonnage, and the 0, and the thin white lines, and the 132,000 unmade against the dark. He stood beside Marshal Vesh while he gave it, and when his own voice faltered, which it did only once, Vesh took up the words, and when Vesh faltered, Telnan took them back, and between the two of them, the report came out whole and steady, and impossible to look away from. 2 witnesses, where there had been 1, exactly as the tired captain had designed. And then Teln gave them the message he had promised to carry, the cruelest and most merciful thing a tired captain had ever asked him to deliver. He told them there would be no third witness. He told them what the silence would sound like if they built again. And he told them, last of all, the thing he had finally understood on 9 long days of empty dark. They sent us home twice, he said to the oldest beings in the Combine, not because we won anything, and not because we earned anything, but because they wanted us to say 1 sentence to you, and I am going to say it now, and then I am going to step down, and the rest is yours. They are not coming for us. We keep going to them. Every fleet we have lost, we sent. Every hull that did not come home, we ordered out. The humans have not taken a single thing from the Combine that the Combine did not carry to their door and lay down at their feet. Stop carrying it. That is the whole of the message. Stop sending fleets to a place where fleets do not come back, and they will leave us entirely alone, because they have never once wanted anything from us, except to be left alone themselves. The council heard him in silence, the way it had heard him before, but the silence was different this time. The first silence, 4 cycles ago, had been the silence of beings who had already decided not to believe him and were merely waiting for him to finish. This silence had no decision in it. It was the silence of beings who had bet everything on a principle and watched the principle fail twice, and who did not yet know what to put in its place, because there had never before in 40,000 cycles been a place where the principle did not hold. They were not refusing the truth this time. They simply did not know how to live in it, and Teln, watching their old faces, understood that this was the most he could hope for, that he had not converted them, only emptied them, and that an emptied council was at least a council that might, in the long quiet cycles to come, be filled with something better. What the council decided in the cycles that followed is a longer story than this one, and a quieter one, and it is not yet finished. But it is known that they did not build a third fleet. It is known that the couriers were recalled, one by one, over the course of a single cycle, and that the advisories that had called humanity a death world plague were quietly withdrawn, never formally repudiated, for the council could not bring itself to admit aloud that it had been wrong, but withdrawn all the same, allowed to lapse, left to be forgotten. And it is known that the word tribute was never again used in a Combine sentence that contained the word human, and that the rim of the galaxy, where the Combine had ruled for 40,000 cycles by the principle that force always wins, grew slowly quieter and stranger, and, for the minor powers who had spent so long fearing the Iron Concord, a great deal safer. Sub-Marshal Teln did step down, as he had said he would. He was not executed. The council had considered it, in the first raw cycles after his return, and had decided against it, not from mercy, but from fear, because 6 couriers had carried his logs to 6 different places, and a Combine that executed the witness only made the witness louder. So they let him retire, into a quiet that he found, after 2 battles and 3 conversations with a tired human captain, that he wanted more than he had ever wanted a victory. He lived a long time. He spoke rarely, and when young officers came to him, as they did, drawn by the legend of the man who had survived the unsurvivable twice, he told them only one thing, the same thing every time, and they left disappointed, because they had wanted a tactic, and he had given them a truth, and the young always mistake one for the other. He told them, "Do not fire first." Marshal Vesh did not retire. He could not bear to. He took a post training the Combine's new commanders, the generation that would grow up after the principle had failed, and he taught them not how to win, for he had learned there was no winning, but how to recognize the one situation in which the whole of their training was worthless, and what to do when they found themselves inside it. He taught them to stop firing. He taught them to ask what the enemy wanted. He taught them that a witness is harder to lie about than a silence, and that the cruelest mercy in the galaxy is to be sent home alive with the truth, and that they should pray, every one of them, never to receive it. He was, by all accounts, a better teacher than he had ever been a marshal, and he said, more than once, that the laugh he had laughed in the disputed dark had cost him everything he was, and bought him everything he became, and that he could not, even now, decide whether the trade had been fair. This much is known, and it is carved now into the first wall of the Combine's Hall of Memory, where every commander who will ever lift a fleet must walk past it before taking command. It is the only line the council allowed to be written about the 2 battles, and it was Sub-Marshal Teln who insisted on the wording, against the council's wish to soften it, because he had earned the right, and because softening it would have been one more refusal to learn. The line reads, 40,000 hulls of the Iron Concord sailed to the Hollow Reach to laugh at one human ship, and the ship offered to let them go home, and they laughed instead, and fired, and of the joke they meant to tell that day, not one hull in 40,000 ever made it back to laugh again.